Let's go!
Welcome to Don Cherry's Grapevine podcast, voted by Apple the biggest, best Canadian podcast of 2020. We're quite proud of that. So, Dad, a lot to get to, and I guess the first thing we got to talk about, we're here with Cindy and Dell, and Dad and I, is the World Juniors.
You know, I feel so bad they lost. I feel bad they had that kid on at the end. I never forgot. And the kid was crying, and his eyes were all red. And I never forgot the time I was, Calgary was playing Vancouver. Is that right? That's
Yeah.
Yeah. So after the game, if I remember Stan Smale had a breakaway, and Mike Vernon made a terrific save. I was standing right in the corner. He just stuck out his glove, and now for the winning Stanley Cup. He would have won the Stanley Cup. So he loses the game. And Bob McCammon was the coach of Vancouver. So he come on after, pretty good guy, come on television after. And I'm sitting there. I'm sitting 2 feet from him. And, you know, it's a small room. And Ron asked him, how do you feel? And he's on television. And he turns to me and he says, how do I feel? I just lost a breakaway away from winning the Stanley Cup. And this guy asked me how I feel. I forget what happened after that. But anyhow.
Well, I talk a little bit about that. If you remember correctly, a couple of weeks ago, I said the one thing I don't like about Hockey Canada is that when Canada loses, it's like a rat's deserting a ship.
Well, there was a lot more than one thing you said about Hockey Canada, but that was relative.
And let's march out the crying teenagers, but you know that.
You should. First of all, you should never have let that guy out there crying.
No, that was the coach's fault.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. If I was his mother and watching that, to see my son, to see her son so upset on TV and sort of looking back at that, I mean, someone would have to say, does someone not know not to have that happen? I would be upset if I was his parents.
Because I remember, you know, you got to protect your players a little bit. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, they interviewed the players in the press room after, and they had composed themselves, and the Canadian kids were okay. But I remember in the Game 7 against Montreal in overtime, the press was going into the dressing room, and you locked the door and said no. And you got what was it you stood on?
It was a milk carton crate that they had the pucks in, and I remember I dumped the thing out and I stood and outside, and I knew all the guys were crying. Imagine men crying inside. I was crying too, and I wouldn't let them in. And then I never forget, I was standing there, and they could hardly wait to get inside. But you have to give the players, I think, to give them 10 minutes. You got to give them more than 10 minutes to compose, especially a game like that. I remember the one guy, French guy, said to me, "No, Mr. Cherry, if you had to put Gilbert in early, you might have won." I was mad because he was right. I remember I said, "Oh, I can't say it." Well, I might as well say it. I said, "Yeah, if my aunt had one, she'd be my uncle." And I never, you know, after it was over, I think my aunt might be ticked off at that. Anyhow. Yeah, I don't like the guy on there. Anyhow, that was.
But let me ask Tim. I know, Tim, you have. I mean, some of the questions the press asks the players and the coaches is so obvious. But we were talking about, you have a top 3 of some of the stupidest questions that were ever put to guys on TV.
Yeah, I think the first one, and you and I have talked about it over and over. Scott Oak with Redden.
Oh yeah, Redden. Yeah,
Redden. I think it ruined his career. Yeah. And basically, long story short, it was an overtime. It was a 2-on-1. And the guy with the puck, Redden, ran with the guy with the puck, and the guy just sifted it over and walked in.
I forget.
They scored. I forget who they were playing. And it was Redden's fault. I mean, everybody,
but he took a chance.
18,000 people are pointing him, your fault. So Scott Oak interviews him right after the game. Again, still sweat pouring
out on the ice.
And he's sweat pouring off him. And he goes, "Well, if you ran, why did you run at him?" And Redden goes, "I don't know." Well, if you just stayed in the middle, he wouldn't have been able to pass the puck. Yeah, I know. Well, why did you? And he goes, well, I don't know. I haven't looked at. Well, we got it right here. Let's take a look at it. Yeah. And you could just see him shrinking.
I have to laugh. Scott Oak used to say, "I'm the voice of doom."
Yeah,
because he always used to get the loser all the time. Guys that lose all the time.
And then the second one was I remember Stan Jonathan being interviewed a long time ago, and so the lady went up and says, "We got Stan Jonathan of the 1970 Boston Bruins." She stands there, and he goes, and there was a Bruins reporter, and she goes, "So Stan, you were one of the goons back then." Stan kind of looked there, goes,
"I never had a goon."
Gee, I had 27 goals. I scored a hat trick in the playoffs. Each said, he goes, "We didn't have any goons. We all could play." And
yeah, they all had 20-some goals.
Yeah. So anyway, that was one that again Stan kind of looked. But the worst of all was somebody in New Jersey was interviewing Paul Coffey, and I think he was with Pittsburgh at the time. And the lady said, "Well, we're here with Paul Coffey, the Pittsburgh Penguins," and she goes, "No, Paul, the knock on you is you have no heart."
Yeah.
It was like somebody took a frying pan and hit him over the head. And he looks and he goes, "Geez, I've won 6 Stanley Cups. I'm the leading scoring defenseman in the history of hockey."
She didn't know.
I don't know about that. I just think, but
no heart. Well, I can. Funny you mentioned no heart. I remember when you talk about no heart. I remember I was at an all-star banquet. I didn't guess an all-star. I know what it was we had to go to banquets all the time, or dinners, or whatever you wanted to call them. All the press and everything, and the players and stuff like that. And I was sitting at the table, and it was just so boring. And I used to have a bad habit of playing with the spoons. Like I put one spoon on the other, and I don't know how. I didn't know I was doing it. I remember Bob Cole grabbed it and just fired them down the hall. Everybody looked over. And I remember Orville Tessier at that banquet, or whatever you want to call it. It was a luncheon. I guess it was a luncheon. That's what they call it, a luncheon. And he was nominated for Coach of the Year in Chicago. And he said, and I'm not paying any attention. He said, "Well, I don't think that's a big deal being nominated." He didn't like me, eh? And he says, "Don Cherry won Coach of the Year, so what?" Something like that. And everybody looks at me, and what is I just shrugged my shoulders. So I sat in the weeds, and no sense of saying anything bad about it then. And I remember they were in Edmonton playing Chicago, and they were flying back, and the pilot said, "We're flying over Minneapolis. This is where they have the famous Mayo Clinic, the first heart transplant or something." And he said to one of the reporters, he said, "I think I'll stop and see if they got any heart." Now, you can say anything you want about players are stupid, talent, but don't say they don't have heart. So I come on and I said, Hockey Night in Canada. I said, they'll lose to Edmonton, will beat them in it. You watch. I said, they'll beat Edmonton, will beat them. And I said, he'll stand, and as they skated off, I said, nobody will shake his hand. And by God, we kept the camera on him. And not a guy shook his hand, because you can say anything you want, as I said before, anything at all. When you say a guy doesn't have heart, that's the end. And one more thing I got to say. I'm in deep with Orville.
Because you played with him, didn't you?
I played in junior with him.
Junior? It goes way back.
Yeah. I don't know why. I guess I must have said something. So we're playing. We're playing Cleveland, and Punch Imlach is the coach.
So this is in Springfield. This is in Springfield, the American.
In Springfield. League. It's our first game, very first game, or I think it was around the first game. And Chevets, who used to call him Destroyer. I mean, he could really hit. I mean, he could, and he drove him into the board. I remember that play. Drove him into the boards. So it was a good hit. It was a good rough hit. So we're in the dressing room. And Orville starts taking off his equipment. He said, we didn't know him. He just come from the Quebec League. And Punch Imlach was the coach. And we always thought, well, if some guys take off all their equipment and put it back on again.
Like this is between the first and second.
Yeah.
But mostly it's goalies, isn't it, that do that?
Yeah, well, Gary Smith used to do it all the time. There's a goalie. He used to call him Axe. But anyhow, he started taking off his equipment. So Punch comes in with 10 minutes to go, before we go on. He said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Hurry up, get your equipment on." He said, "Oh, I'm not playing in this league." It was the end of the first period. He says, no, I'm not playing in this league. He says, I'm going back to Quebec League. And he did. And never played in the American League again, I don't think. And Punch looked at us and you see, Punch came from the Quebec League, and he was and Orville could really score. And in the warm-ups, he'd say, I'd hit that post, I'll hit that post, and he could do it.
So how did Punch Similak come from the Quebec League?
He just come out. He was he took over for the Boston Bruins. He was in the Boston Bruins organization before he went to Toronto.
Because he took over from your nemesis there, Eddie Shore, right?
Yeah, we took over, and we had a great team. We had a good team. We had one of those goalies. I shouldn't say. But anyhow, that if you were losing 3-2, and you tied it up, and he was playing lousy. If you tied it up, he'd play lousy. If you were losing 4-3, he'd be playing great. If you tied it up, you knew one was going to go in. Anyhow, we're off on an off time. So Punch, I remember. Now we're talking about Punch. We talk about Punch sometime because I get a lot of stories on Punch. So anyhow,
but let's get back. Let's just get back.
Yeah,
to
let's go. Let's get back to the juniors again. I don't know how we get talking there. If they had played the first game, they were up the first game. The Canadian team was up the first game. But they had sort of, let's face it, let's say they had a cakewalk all the way through. And United States, you say what you want about them, they had a team of mean grinders. They knew they didn't that game. They knew they had to be 100%, over 100%, or they're not going to be Canadian. And Canada didn't have the jump. Now I know it's hard to believe. An important game, you don't have the jump. You could tell right from the start they didn't have the jump. Tim, you and I talked about it. I can tell, and you could tell if you watch the game a long time, that when the defense pinches, the first couple of games, our Canadian team was they were pinching behind the net. They were into when a team doesn't pinch, and I could see right off the bat they were a little afraid.
Yeah, they were backing out the first period. They weren't pinching at all.
When you don't pinch, see in the first game they took a chance and they pinched. If you don't pinch, and one thing you're happy about though, and I know you're happy about is about what is it, Damien? I think is Devin Levy. Yeah. He played terrific. You can't play many games on him.
No. Well, as I say, the one thing that really upset me was the way Team Canada handled at the end, letting the kid go on all upset. But the one positive is that Devin Levi, he set records, and he's 6 foot, and hopefully now this will get some of the smaller goalies a chance to play.
And remember the goaltender we watched. And he kept his team in all the time.
Yeah, it was about 2 years ago. We were small goalie, so he would have been 15 years old. He was small. He was like 5'9", which is small now.
That's true, because one of the announcers, I was watching the game, and the announcer goes, and he is on a smaller side of the goalie being at 6 foot. I'm going, can you imagine being on the smaller side at being at 6 foot?
Yeah, when they're 6 foot.
Yeah.
Well, he mentioned 6 foot in the same sentence.
They're not really 6 foot. They're about 5'11".
Oh, yeah. I see.
So we watched his goalie, and he played for the Mississauga Rebels, and they weren't a very strong team, and he kept him in every game.
Every game.
They made the playoffs, but this kid was just unbelievable. And talking to the scouts, and the scouts said, I have a tough time selling a 5'9" goalie to my, who's 15. So you can grow to be, you don't have a growth spurt, right? So
we thought he was great, eh?
But if they can stop pucks, what difference does it make with being the size? Look at Potvin and the Cat and all those guys.
Yeah. Well, there's only
Joseph.
Yeah. Well, they're all kind of. I looked at of the goalies that played 20 or more games last year in the NHL. Only 2 were 6 foot. All the rest were 6'2".
You had the smallest goalie of all time, Dad, in Rochester Amherst. Remember Bobby Perreault?
Oh yeah,
how short was he?
Funny, the goaltenders back in those days, they were always small, but they could move.
Yeah, that's right. That's why you called him the Cat. What was it, Potvin? Because he could move. He was fast and all that.
Mm-hmm. I'm not knocking anybody, but I've always said you never, ever run up a score. Now, was it 15-1 or 15 or
16 nothing? I think it was
16 nothing.
They beat the poor Germans, Canada.
Yeah, and they were hurt, and guys, they didn't have guys playing and everything. And you run up a score. Remember the time, Tim, Colorado was playing Buffalo, and they beat them 10-3 or 9-3, and I said that game's going to put us in first spot. And I pointed to a game with about 3 games to go. They're going to play Colorado, and Colorado had a lousy team.
Yeah, so Boston, you were coaching Bruins, and Boston and Buffalo were in a dogfight. I think we ended up beating them by 2 points or something.
Yeah, we just beat them. I said that's the game that's going to put us in first spot. Sure enough, Colorado walked in and beat them right there, because you don't beat a team 15-0, and you bring the hockey gods. Now, a lot of people, oh, here he is with the hockey gods again. Believe me, it'll catch up with you. The players or somebody will catch up with you. Karma, hockey gods, this is for all the young coaches out there. And I remember when I first come from Colorado, I was watching a game down in, what do they call it now? The one we used to go to all the time, North Sheridan. Anyhow, we used to go to the game. Anyhow, we went to the game, and I was standing there all alone, and I saw juniors. No, they were Bantams, and they were going in where they were beating this team from the United States. They were really hammering, and they were shooting at the pads. So I talked to the coach after. I said, "Did I see something? Did they were they shooting at the pads?" He says, "You know what? I didn't have to tell him." And what I'm saying is, when you never ever run up a score, because when you run up a score, the players always remember and the coach always remember. And I was really surprised that guy said it could have been 20-0.
So is there something
200-0?
Is there something
it could have been? I think.
Is there something that the coach can do to not run? He goes, like, a coach could say, "Well, what am I supposed to do? They shoot shoot at the net and the puck goes in." What can a coach do not to run up the score?
Well, I remember Brian Kilray. They were when I first took over the Mississauga. He played the defense up in the defense. Remember, he was coaching the Ottawa 67.
Yeah, he put the defense up forward,
and they scored.
Yeah. I can tell you what Brian said also after the game when he came into the office. He says he said the score. He goes, he told the kids to pass the puck 5 times before they took a shot on net.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he did. That's what he told me.
I think with the juniors, when they hit the goalpost, killing that penalty,
Karma was coming through.
I thought, this isn't good.
And he hit the pole. Did he hit it 3 times?
He hit the post. Yeah, well, and their goalie.
Anyhow, the kids played good.
Yeah,
I don't think it was the best team. They had all first-round drafters.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder at that too. I really wonder, did Team Canada wanted to get a team with all first-round picks, to say they had a team with all first-round picks. I wonder that, because they said, TSM kept saying it could be the greatest junior team.
No, they weren't the great. I heard that, and I wrote down a few things. I write something down. I couldn't remember all these names, so I wrote them down. I said, it is a great team. They should have won if they had been up. I think.
But the greatest team was was 2005.
2005
World Juniors.
I wrote it down. There was Seabrook, played for Chicago. Bell, Shea Weber, Jeff Carter, remember, plays for LA. Crosby, Anthony Stewart, doing a great job on Sportsnet. He had I think that's Anthony.
Yep.
They had Mike Richards. They had Andrew Ladd. And Corey Perry, Bergeron. I mean, that was the greatest.
Richards,
Mike Richards. Yeah,
and Phaneuf.
I tell you a story about Mike Richards. It's a funny story, and I know we go off on tangents, but if I don't, that Ron told me the story one time that Mike Richards was sitting around. Now sorry, Mike, but if you are listening, you sort of had little buck teeth, kind of, not really buck, but kind of big teeth in the front, and they used to call him the rabbit all the time.
Well, that would indicate it.
So they were having a few beers, and the one guy there, he says, "We'll have 4 beers and a box of carrots for that guy." So now he tells me this story, And so he's playing that night against the Leafs, and he scored a goal. And I said, and there's Mike Richards scoring the goal, and he hopped over to the boards. And that's not. Anyhow, I think that was
one of
great.
those, Dad, that's one of those many inside jokes that when people are watching you and Ron, and we were sitting at home, and I know the inside joke, and you go, oh boy.
Well, yeah. And just before we move on, just one other thing about the World Juniors that we talked about before, that I think. And because you always give crap for the refs and the linesmen, but they did a great job.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up.
And they were all Canadian.
They did. That was, you know what? I enjoyed that game. And I don't know, first of all, we'll go the linesmen. Yeah. They put their hand in the air and ping the game, and
when they're facing off, they never throw anybody out.
They didn't.
They put their hands in the air, and they were right back at it again. The game was just, there was great flow to it. And I think the referees did a super job. Absolutely super. And I'm on the refs all the time. Those games, and no icings, eh?
No.
I loved it.
Well, listen, can I ask a question, though? I was a little confused. I was watching it. How do they determine whether to wave off the icing? Because I wonder if the players know as much as me as that they know.
The players know.
They know?
Here's what happens, Cindy. First of all, let's go the juniors. When the puck is shot down, they'll turn, like say it's going down the right-hand side, they'll turn to their left, away from it, and the NHL guys, they'll call that.
Oh.
But the Canadians in this series, we're like Europeans, they point at the guy.
See,
they point at that guy. You could have got that.
You're not fooling me.
You're not fooling me. I remember one game I kept track of the icings in the National Hockey League last year. There was 21 icings because the guys just turn away. They don't try. And the players know they make fools of the linesmen. And as long as I was there, I'd show it. But in this one, you could not criticize the linesman because they'd point at the guy. He could have had it.
Yeah, they were really
fantastic,
really good. And they always say, "Well, why can't it was great hockey?" Well, it was great hockey because the referees just let them play.
And the referees were great. They called every penalty that was called. I agreed with. There wasn't any chintzy penalties. And the National Hockey League, I don't care if I say it or not, they're trying to. Every sport in the world is trying to speed it up, and we do everything in our power to slow it down. I could give you a whole bunch of instances in that. If you wanted to take a goal or an offside, everybody in the building knows it's offside, or everybody knows it's a goal, and they're looking at the great big screen up above. And at home, you're looking at a big screen, and you look at the referees; they're looking at a little wee. Anyhow, the National Hockey League.
Well, it'll be interesting. Hockey's coming up. We tape this Sunday morning, so hockey's starting on Wednesday. Let's count how many players get thrown out of the face-off circle.
I think they're going to learn from those guys.
Well, I hope so, because you know what, the kids, they'd fake the kids out like they have to. They'd put their arm up. All the kids would back off, and then they drop the puck.
Well, then they'd argue.
And they wouldn't argue. And then the other thing too is, again, we talked about it, is that. First of all, I was really surprised that the kids never jumped around.
No, never dove. Never dove.
On every team.
Never dove. And after, even when the United States, when they scored the big goal, they never banged the glass and went bananas.
And then, because the referees were so good, they weren't diving. There was no diving. There was no phantom calls.
When you and I go, we know right off the bat, if the guy calls a dive, everybody dives, and the minor midgets. So hats off to the officials, and let's not jump on the kids. The kids did a good job. They did their best. They just weren't, something happened in the first half of that game, and then they hit the goal post, and United States knew they were in a game, and let's not jump on the kids. But I never liked all first-rounders. I always like role players all the time, and someday I'll tell you about how I did the role players all the time. And Dale Hunter, I think, had role players.
Yeah, well, you look at his team. He got that Akil Thomas, who was, he was a later second round pick, and he scored the gold medal winning goal. And but Hunter knew,
he had Merkley.
He was the guy. Yeah, he was the guy that hurt that Ryan Merkley was a first round pick. took him into the boards.
Yeah.
But he's just a mean guy to play against, and Hunter wanted that, right?
Yeah.
And he ended up scoring. He didn't play a lot, but when he was out there, he did his job, and then he scored the game-winning goal. So Dad, I think we got to move on to the NHL. Everybody's wanting to hear what's going on. But before we go, we just want to thank our sponsors, Spreads.ca. It's a First Nations casino and sportsbook. And for the hockey coming up, they're having a contest called Cherry Picks. So go on Spreads.ca. It's good to the 11th, and you can win up to $5,000. So they're all excited about hockey coming back because tough having a sports book this year without the thing. So
it's a funny thing you're talking there. Basketball looks like it's a practice, and I figured out why. They had all the people sitting around, right next to the court.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us some more. I love, I like this. It's Canadian money and it's Canadian.
They're Canadian. It's tailored towards Canadians because all the other sports bets you got to bet U.S. bucks. You can get killed on that
conversion.
Yeah, conversion rate.
And we're having fun, eh?
So and the good thing is that like if you want to go on the casino side because you have a casino, you can play 50-cent blackjack, which sometimes you just want to play. You don't want to be playing $5 a hand, and then you can bet minimum. You can bet $1 on the games, which is always fun. Like yesterday, I bet on Tampa Bay winning. So Spreads.ca, they have a contest up to January 11th, Cherry Pick. And if you log in and deposit some money, you can win up to $5,000. So